In just 23 seconds, what was supposed to be a light-hearted chat between Seth Meyers and Mark Wahlberg turned into one of the most explosive meltdowns in late-night television history. A surprise ambush, accusations flying across the desk, and a complete character breakdown that left the entire studio in shocked silence. This is the story of how a talk show host destroyed his own reputation in front of millions. Before we dive into this chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the moments they don't want you to see, and the truth behind the fake smiles. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the drama. Last night's episode of Late Night started like any other. The band played, the audience clapped, and Seth Meyers walked out with his usual grin plastered across his face. Mark Wahlberg was scheduled as the main guest, there to promote his latest action movie. The actor strolled onto the stage wearing a simple black jacket and jeans, waving to the crowd with that trademark Boston confidence. He sat down, shook Seth's hand, and everything seemed normal. For the first few minutes, things went smoothly. Seth asked about the new film, and Mark talked about the intense training he did for the role. He described waking up at 3 a.m. to work out, eating 6 meals a day, and pushing himself to the absolute limit. The audience laughed at his stories about accidentally hitting a stunt coordinator during a fight scene. Mark was relaxed, cracking jokes, and the energy felt good. Then Seth shifted in his chair, and something in his tone changed. His smile became tighter, more forced. He leaned forward and said, "You know, Mark, I want to talk about something else for a second. Something that's been on a lot of people's minds." Mark's expression didn't change much, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. "Sure, man. What's up?" Seth glanced down at his cards, then back up. "There's been some talk online, some articles written about your past, specifically about incidents when you were younger. Hate crimes, assault charges, things you did as a teenager in Boston. And I think a lot of viewers want to know why you haven't addressed this more directly." The studio went quiet. You could feel the air get heavy. Mark sat back in his chair, and his jaw tightened. "Seth, I've talked about this before. Multiple times. I was a stupid kid who made terrible mistakes. I've apologized. I've met with the victims. I've spent decades trying to be a better person. I thought we were here to talk about the movie." Seth held up a hand. "I hear you, but don't you think that in today's world, with everything going on about accountability and cancel culture, people deserve more than just 'I was a kid'? You nearly blinded a man. You attack people because of their race. These aren't small mistakes." Mark's face went red. Not embarrassed red, but angry red. His voice stayed controlled, but you could hear the edge creeping in. "Are you serious right now? You ambush me on your show with this? I've done everything I can to make amends. I've worked with youth programs. I've talked to kids about avoiding the mistakes I made. I've been public about my regrets. What more do you want from me?" Seth leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'm just asking the questions that people want answered, Mark. That's my job as a host. And frankly, some people think your apologies feel convenient. They happened around the time you were trying to get a pardon in Massachusetts. Doesn't that seem a little calculated to you?" The audience made a collective sound, half gasp, half nervous murmur. Mark pointed a finger at Seth, not threateningly, but definitely making a point. "That's bullshit. And you know it. The pardon thing was about clearing my record for business reasons, but I withdrew the application because I realized it sent the wrong message. I owned that mistake too, but you're sitting here, what, trying to get viral clips? Trying to be some moral authority?" Seth's face flushed, but he pushed forward. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation, something I think you've been avoiding." Mark stood up slightly, then sat back down, clearly trying to control himself. "Avoiding? Dude, I've given interviews about this. I've been honest about what a punk I was. I was addicted to drugs. I was angry. I was ignorant and racist and violent. I've said all of this publicly, but I also changed my entire life. I got clean. I worked hard. I raised my kids to be good people. I've tried to give back. What are you doing besides sitting behind a desk judging people?" Seth's expression hardened. "I'm holding people accountable, something Hollywood doesn't do enough of. And maybe if more hosts asked these tough questions instead of letting celebrities come on and sell their movies without pushback, we'd live in a better world." The tension was suffocating now. Mark shook his head. a bitter laugh escaping. Accountable? You want to talk about accountability, Seth? Where's your accountability? You built a career making fun of people, throwing cheap shots at politicians and celebrities from behind your little desk. You've never had to face real consequences for anything. You grew up comfortable, went to nice schools, got handed opportunities. I grew up in poverty, surrounded by violence and drugs, and I clawed my way out of that hell. So don't lecture me about accountability. Seth's voice rose. Oh, here we go. I had it tough so I get a pass defense. That doesn't work anymore, Mark. People aren't buying it. Mark's eyes went dark. I'm not asking for a pass. I'm asking for basic human decency. I'm asking you to recognize that people can change and grow. But you don't actually care about that, do you? You care about ratings. You care about getting clicks and views and making yourself look like some crusader for justice. But you're not. You're just another privileged guy punching down to make yourself feel important. Seth slammed his hand on the desk. Punching down? You're a millionaire movie star. How is asking you about your criminal past punching down? Mark stood up this time, fully out of his seat. Because you're not asking, you're attacking. There's a difference. You invited me here under false pretenses, then tried to embarrass me on national television. That's not journalism, Seth. That's being an asshole. The audience was dead silent. A few people in the crowd looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Seth stood up too, his face red with anger. Get out of here with that. You're just mad because someone finally confronted you. You want everyone to forget your past and treat you like a hero. But that's not how it works. Mark took a step closer to the desk. I never asked to be treated like a hero. I asked to be treated like a human being who made mistakes and worked to fix them. But you can't understand that, can you? Because you've never had to fix anything. You've never had to look at yourself in the mirror and hate what you see. You've never had to rebuild your life from nothing. Seth pointed at Mark. Don't put your issues on me. I'm not the one with a violent past. I'm not the one who needs to apologize to victims. Mark's voice dropped to a low, dangerous tone. No, you're just the one who exploits other people's pain for entertainment. You're the one who pretends to care about justice while really just caring about himself. At least I own my shit, Seth. Can you say the same? Seth's mouth opened and closed. He looked rattled, caught off guard. I don't have to defend myself to you. This is my show. Mark laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Your show. Right. Your safe little bubble where you get to be the good guy and everyone else is the villain. Must be nice living in that fantasy world. Seth's voice cracked slightly, losing some of its earlier confidence. You know what, Mark? Maybe you should leave if you're not going to have an actual conversation. Mark spread his arms wide. An actual conversation? You mean one where I sit here and let you trash me while you pretend it's for some greater good? Nah, I'm done with that. But let's be clear about something before I go. You brought up my past like you're some arbiter of morality. But you're not. You're a bully hiding behind a microphone. You thought you could tear me down to build yourself up, but all you did was show everyone who you really are. Seth's face was bright red now, and his hands were shaking slightly. Get off my stage, Mark nodded slowly. Gladly. But before I do, let me tell you something. I spent years hating myself for the things I did when I was young. I worked hard to become a better person, to make amends, to show through my actions that I'm not that kid anymore. And most people, regular people, they get that. They understand that redemption is real and that change is possible. But you don't get it because you don't want to. It's easier for you to tear people down than to acknowledge that life is complicated and people are complicated. So you go ahead and feel good about yourself tonight. Tell yourself you did something important, but we both know the truth. Seth's voice was almost shrill now. I said, get off my stage. Mark turned to the audience. Sorry, you had to see this, folks. I came here to talk about a movie and ended up in an ambush. But that's showbiz, I guess. He looked back at Seth one more time. You should be ashamed of yourself, man. Seriously. Seth pointed toward the exit, his hand trembling. Leave. Now. Mark shook his head, a sad smile on his face. I'm going, but you might want to think about why you felt the need to do this, because it says a lot more about you than it does about me. The actor walked toward the side of the stage, his footsteps heavy on the floor. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent, so they did nothing. A few people whispered to each other. The cameras stayed on Mark as he reached the curtain, and just before he disappeared behind it, he turned back one last time. "I've made mistakes, but I've owned them," Mark called out. "Can you say the same, Seth?" Seth stood frozen at his desk, his face a mixture of anger and something else. Maybe embarrassment, maybe shame. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mark gave a final nod and walked off the stage, the curtain swinging behind him. The studio remained silent for what felt like forever. Seth looked down at his desk, shuffling his note cards pointlessly. His hands were still shaking. When he finally looked up at the cameras, his usual confidence was gone. He cleared his throat twice before speaking. "We'll be right back after this break," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But as the show cut to commercial, you could see it in his face. Seth Meyers knew he had messed up. He knew he had crossed a line. And he knew that this confrontation wouldn't be remembered as some brave moment of accountability. It would be remembered as a host ambushing a guest, losing control, and revealing his own worst qualities in the process. The cameras kept rolling during the commercial break, and staff members rushed onto the stage. Some checked on Seth, while others looked toward the exit where Mark had disappeared. You could hear heated whispers, people arguing about what had just happened. One crew member shook his head in disbelief. Seth sat down heavily in his chair, pulling off his suit jacket and loosening his tie. He ran his hands through his hair, messing it up. A producer came over and leaned in close, speaking quietly but urgently. Seth just nodded, his eyes staring at nothing in particular. In the audience, people were pulling out their phones. Within seconds, clips of the confrontation were being uploaded to social media. The hashtag started immediately. The internet was exploding with reactions, and most of them weren't favorable toward Seth. When the show came back from commercial, Seth tried to compose himself. He put his jacket back on and straightened his tie, but his smile was gone. His energy was deflated. He stumbled through the rest of the show, bringing out his next guest with none of his usual charm. The musical performance that closed the show felt awkward, with Seth barely visible at his desk, still looking shaken. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out, the whispers continued. People weren't talking about Mark Wahlberg's movie or his past. They were talking about Seth Meyers and how badly he had handled the situation. They were talking about how uncomfortable they felt watching a host attack his guest. They were talking about how Mark had kept his cool while Seth had completely lost his. Backstage, Mark was already in his car, heading back to his hotel. He texted his wife about what happened, venting his frustration but also expressing disappointment. He had genuinely thought Seth was a decent guy. He had agreed to come on the show as a favor, and instead, he walked into an ambush designed to make him look bad. But in the end, it had backfired spectacularly. Seth remained at his desk long after the audience left, staring at the empty studio. His producer sat down next to him, and they talked in low voices. Seth kept shaking his head, saying things like, "I thought it was the right thing to do," and "I was just asking questions." But deep down, he knew the truth. He had wanted a viral moment. He had wanted to be seen as brave and tough. Instead, he had come across as petty and cruel. The next morning, news outlets would pick up the story. Entertainment shows would dissect every moment of the confrontation. Social media would be flooded with opinions, and the vast majority would side with Mark. People would praise the actor for keeping his composure and calling out Seth's behavior. They would criticize the host for ambushing his guest and weaponizing someone's past mistakes for ratings. But that was all in the future. For now, in the empty studio, Seth Meyers sat alone with the growing realization that he had damaged his reputation in a way that might never fully heal. He had thought he was being righteous, but he had really just been reckless. He had thought he was holding someone accountable, but he had really just been bullying a guest on his own show. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Mark Wahlberg was shaking his head, still processing what had happened. He had spent decades working to overcome his past, to prove that people can change. And in one night, a talk show host had tried to tear all of that down for the sake of television drama. The worst part was that Seth had made Mark defend himself against charges he had already addressed, apologized for, and worked to make right. It wasn't about justice or accountability. It was about making Seth feel important. And that, more than anything else, was what made the whole confrontation so ugly. As Mark's car pulled up to his hotel, he made a decision. He wouldn't trash Seth in the media. He wouldn't go on other shows to talk about what happened. He would take the high road, the way he had tried to do his entire adult life. Because unlike Seth Meyers, Mark Wahlberg understood that real strength doesn't come from attacking others. It comes from controlling yourself, even when someone is trying to provoke you. Seth Meyers had learned a hard lesson that night. In trying to make himself look like a hero, he had revealed himself to be something far less admirable. He had shown that beneath the jokes and the charm was someone willing to hurt others for his own benefit. And in doing so, he had handed Mark Wahlberg a victory without the actor even trying. The stage was empty now. The lights dimmed. But the damage was done. What happened between Seth Meyers and Mark Wahlberg would be talked about for years to come, not as an example of brave journalism, but as a cautionary tale about what happens when ego and ambition overtake basic human decency. Seth had wanted a moment. He got one. Just not the kind he had hoped for. Mark walked into his hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. He was angry, yes, but more than that, he was disappointed. Disappointed that someone he had respected would try to use his painful past as a weapon. Disappointed that a platform meant for entertainment had been turned into an arena for personal attacks. Disappointed that after all his efforts to grow and change, there would always be people ready to drag him back into the darkness he had fought so hard to escape. But Mark had survived worse than Seth Meyers. He had survived poverty, addiction, violence, and his own demons. He had rebuilt himself from the ground up, and no talk show host could take that away from him. So he took a deep breath, said a quick prayer like he did every night, and reminded himself that tomorrow was another day. Another chance to be better, to do better, to show the world that redemption wasn't just possible, it was real. Seth Meyers, on the other hand, would have a much harder time shaking off what happened. Because, unlike Mark, who had spent years acknowledging and atoning for his mistakes, Seth had just made a massive one on live television. And the question now was whether he had the character to own it, to apologize, and to learn from it. Only time would tell. But as the night drew to a close and the controversy began to spread across the internet like wildfire, one thing was crystal clear. Mark Wahlberg had walked out of that studio with his dignity intact. While Seth Meyers had lost far more than just a guest. He had lost the respect of his audience, the trust of his peers, and worst of all, he had lost sight of what made him want to be a host in the first place. In the world of late-night television, there are moments that define careers. Moments that show who someone really is when the cameras are rolling and the pressure is on. Last night, both Mark Wahlberg and Seth Meyers had such a moment. And the contrast between them couldn't have been starker. One man showed grace under fire, while the other revealed his true colors in the ugliest way possible. The fallout from this confrontation would be severe. Sponsors would question their association with the show. Network executives would demand explanations. Other celebrities would think twice before agreeing to appear as guests. And Seth Meyers would have to live with the fact that in trying to destroy someone else's reputation, he had destroyed his own. Mark Wahlberg, meanwhile, would move on. He had dealt with worse critics than Seth Meyers. He had faced his demons and come out the other side. He had proven, time and time again, that he was more than the worst things he had ever done. And if one angry talk show host couldn't understand that, well, that was Seth's problem, not Mark's. As the clock struck midnight and the date changed, the story of what happened on Late Night with Seth Meyers was just beginning to unfold. But the ending was already written. Mark Wahlberg had won, not by fighting dirty, but by refusing to sink to Seth's level. He had won by being the bigger man, by speaking his truth with conviction, and by walking away when it became clear that no productive conversation was possible. Seth Meyers had lost, not because he asked tough questions, but because he did so without empathy, without fairness, and without any genuine interest in understanding the person sitting across from him. He had lost because he had valued viral moments over human connection, ratings over respect, and his own ego over everything else. And when the dust settled, when all the hot takes had been written and all the reaction videos had been posted, the lesson would be clear. Ambushing your guests might get you attention, but it won't get you respect. And in the end, respect is all that really matters. Mark Wahlberg knew that. Seth Meyers was about to learn it the hard way.